Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Burbs. So, for a lot of people, this may not be the top on the list for Tom Hanks films. A lot of people will probably go into movies like Big, or a lot of people will go into Vinci Codes, or a lot of people will probably just go into uh, like a lot of just kind of out there kind of movies that really probably wouldn't be movies like The Burbs or maybe even Joe versus the Volcano or like Cloud Atlas, I think, the bizarrish movie with Tom Hanks and Holly Berry. But yeah, so The Burbs. So this story kind of feels like very old fashioned. I say very old fashioned because really this is the like if you're going to have a horror story, usually this is it. This is a story about a neighbor that seems to be kind of out of place out of the rest of this neighborhood. And so we start to have this entire neighborhood who are to start having suspicions about their neighbor on how it seems that nobody comes in and out from this house. It seems like we never actually get to see them, kind of poking their head out for any number of things like getting the mail or anything whatsoever. So it seems like this neighborhood starts to gather around and start telling ghost stories about other kind of uh, homes and places that they've heard before, and that just starts to arouse suspicion of just neighbors going and not being as, I guess, public as everyone else is in this neighborhood. So the more and more that these neighbors are to keep to themselves, the more other neighbors want to go and just knock on their door and just be like, hey man, like, is anybody alive in there? Is there a body in here? Is anybody alive? Is anybody alive in this home? Because it seems like we don't have a consistent coming of going of everybody. So, but yeah, so Tom Hanks' character in this movie is called Ray Peterson, and so Ray is actually on a vacation from work. I'm kind of curious how long this guy's vacation is because it seems like he's on vacation for a number of days, as well as seemingly a bulk of his neighbors are, I guess, to assumably probably be retired from the army, or probably we have a character like Art, which I don't know what exactly he does. Like, is he just a writer? Could that be it? Like, because they never actually, I don't think they ever say what his actual job is. But it seems like he is good with electricity, so maybe he does like some commissioned electricity jobs. I don't know. But anyways, so going into this movie, I thought like this movie was old fashioned, but like I thought that it was just kind of interesting enough. Like it's I never fully ever watched like this film before, so I just kind of came at the tail end of it at one point. And so I was just like, you know what? I just wanted to just kind of watch this film and really like it was the fun of it all instead of having to just think of like, oh my god, I think this might be a Tom Hanks movie that everyone's gonna want to see, because more than likely everybody likes movies like Big or a number of other things that I probably already have mentioned. So like for this one, I was just like, I'm just gonna come in here and have fun because I've never fully fledgedly watched this film. Out of all the other Tom Hanks movies that I've seen, I've never fully fledgedly watched this one from start to finish. Like I caught it for the tail end of it, and that was about it. So, with that said, I think it's that coveted time for me to just go into spoilers because I think this has a kind of long form, interesting spoiler like version, especially once they start to get to the ghost stories. They bizarrely even mentioned a 1977 film called The Sentinel, which I don't know how exactly that movie ties into what they're talking about. I think Corey Feldman's character just randomly adds some movie, I guess. maybe that might have been a film that the director of this movie or whoever wrote this film was attached to, and maybe that's why they just bizarrely tried to reference that movie in this film, I guess, to try to get some sales out of a movie that they've done previously. I don't know. I thought it was like I don't quite understand what the connection was that they were trying to make uh with that the Sentinel movie. And you know there's also a Michael Douglas the Sentinel movie. It's not that. It's the 1977 film with the guy from the first Fright Night and the guy who was the 1966 Batman Penguin. That movie. So let's get into that double five time territory and let's go into spoilers. I thought that this movie was just kind of just it was fun. Like it was a fun thing. It was a fun thing to watch. It was fun to just kind of try to have these people try to figure out the mystery of this neighbor that just won't come out of his house. So it is that coveted time to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So, so in the very beginning of this, we are to showcase that Tom Hanks' character, who is Ray Peters, is to seemingly be on vacation. We consistently have his wife, who is Carol Peters, asking him, it's like, well, hey, like, what are you going to do for your vacation? And Ray is like, I don't know. Like, she comes up with some kind of ideas, and Ray is like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I really want to do that. If anything, it kind of gets to the point where really Ray just starts to really hang out with his neighbors a lot. And really, they just start, like, we have it to where Art much more so than Ray. Like Ray kind of gets like wrangled in with Art, and eventually, Mark, who is also their like military neighbor, is to like also kind of like see what they're doing and kind of like basically like watch over them as they are to do this, but then also kind of chime in and help them out from time to time to just kind of see like yeah this guy is like this neighbor is kind of suspicious, there is something about it that seems kind of out of place. So really we have Art who is to basically come to Ray and just say, hey, you know what, these new neighbors here, like if anything, like they haven't like gone out of their home and I don't know how long. And so Ray is like, well, yeah, but like the last neighbors that were actually in this same house, like we never saw them really at all. Also, like, what do you think that we're gonna get new neighbors and all of a sudden they're just gonna be like out and about like the last ones were? But Art is like, well, maybe there's actually something about them. Like maybe there's something goofy about them because Ray had gone the night before and almost started to walk over to their house, but then all of a sudden a big gust of wind was pushing Ray away not to walk over to their house. And so Ray just walked right back into his home and just did nothing. Ray heard this really odd like sound that didn't quite make sense to him, so that's what aroused his suspicion. But then again, eventually the wind that had gusted as soon as Ray was to put his foot up made him decide, you know what, how about I just go back into my home and just call it a night and just go back to sleep. So Mark also noticed that Ray had went out to go and check his neighbors, but then eventually went back into his home because I guess Mark doesn't sleep all that much either. So Art is to have this suspicion that it's like, well, yeah, like why is it that like we haven't seen these neighbors in so long? And so Ray is just like, well, like maybe they work at night, like any number of reasons. Like there could be a good reason for why these people are never to show themselves. So all of a sudden we are to have really just Ray and all of his neighborhood cronies. Eventually, we have Corey Feldman, who is to be this kid who is to be painting his house. His name is Ricky Butler. So we have Ricky, who when I immediately heard like Corey Feldman's voice, I'm like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like every single time. Like we have like Donatello, 9.95. And immediately, every time I hear Corey Feldman's voice, I immediately think of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I normally don't think of like Corey Feldman, the Lost Boys. Like I don't think of that. I always go to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I don't know why. So Corey is to, or Ricky is to be painting his house, and bizarrely, he ends up going and smacking some things of paint onto his speakers. But Ricky is to eventually kind of blare his music while he's painting his house. And so Ricky is kind of a nosy neighbor, but he's kind of nosy about his other neighbors doing things to other neighbors. And so it gets to the point where this where with Ricky where it consistently just ramps up, where like Ricky is like trying to invite all of his friends over to watch the neighbors do things to the neighbors, and like see where eventually something is going to crazily happen. And so like Ricky's making phone calls, having pizza delivered, and eventually pushing this on to like see where all this heads. So So at one point, we do have one guy who is to pop his head out from this home, and his name is Hans. He pops out, kind of touches upon his beard. Everyone looks out at him and kind of looks at him like, dude, he looks a little creepy. And then he heads back into his home. So really the neighborhood is just all aflutter, because really they're assuming that these neighbors, just because of their last name, which is Klopek, they're assuming that maybe that these guys are like Czechoslovakian or something, or maybe they can be some kind of terrorists or some kind of bizarre-ish like thing that honestly just makes an escalation of no sense. Like as if they're going to bomb this whole entire neighborhood, which again does not make sense. So, because of how just consistent that everybody's just in an uproar about these one neighbors, we finally just have both Art and Bray that are just so tempted to just go and knock on the door of these people's homes. So Ray is to go and grab onto this door knocker, and all of a sudden there is a piece of this home, like this sign of the address of this home, that's to all of a sudden adjust to be, instead of 669, it's to say 666. And so there isn't any answer at the door, so both Tom and Art decide to knock on the door again. All of a sudden, the home address sign is to fall over, and then all of a sudden, bees or bugs or flies or something are to come out of this house to go and attack both Ray and Art's character. So all of a sudden, we see Ray and we see Art, and they're running out of this house. And so Mark knows what's going on, and so immediately he goes and tries to grab his hose and run to get both of these guys to come to him, so that way he can spray them down with water. The funny thing is this guy keeps continuing to run with the hose, not realizing how short his hose is, and he just eats it onto his ground. He just gets smacked back into his yard. And then like Mark like tells the guys, run over here, like I'll spray you with water, until like they're eventually the bugs are all from off of them. Excuse me. Ooh. So yeah, so they get to like that piece, and so but like the neighborhood continues with these scary stories. Eventually Ray is to go over to Art's house to, I guess, smoke cigars. And so we have Ricky's character that is, I'm going to pause here for a second. we're to have Ricky's character mention about a 1977 film called The Sentinel. And also, Art is to mention about some guy who was to go and kill off his entire family and then go make a lot of ice cream treats for the rest of the neighborhood. Unfortunately, Art mentions that this guy's home eventually got so hot during that time period that eventually the smell of the dead bodies could have been sniffed out by any part of the neighborhood. So the odor of a dead person eventually had a lot of people in a neighborhood get very suspicious that this guy is just that this guy is eventually he had to have killed somebody in there because the stench of it was just awful. Because also Ricky is making the kind of suspicion of just man, if any whatever they're doing in their basement just smells awful, it smells like death. And so that's when Art is to tell that story about a guy who was to, I guess, love to make ice cream treats, and eventually he ended up killing his entire family, and then people figured it out that's what he did. So pushing on, so really it just gotten to the point to where eventually they're like, dude, we gotta figure something about this house. We gotta figure out how we gotta figure out how we can just figure do something to get to these people or to talk to them or something. Plus also, because the main reason why they are to do this is to eventually we have outside there is pouring down rain, and so we have some of the neighbors kind of scooting together, and they're by their garbage during the pouring down rain, and all of a sudden we are to see Hans drive out of his garage, and I'm immediately thinking, I'm like, is this car look just like the Green Hornet car? Immediately every time I saw this car, I'm like, is this the Green Hornet car? Because it looks just like it. Or I had just seen this car somewhere else. It kind of looks like the Green Hornet car, or it kind of looks like a car that I'd seen probably in this one movie called The Car. But this, for some reason, looked very familiar to me, and I was wondering if it was the Green Hornet car. But anyways, so Hans goes and bizarrely drives this car all the way to his garbage cans, takes a bag from out of his trunk to toss it in this garbage can. And so bizarrely, evidently, the garbage wasn't fitting, so Hans just kept shoving it and shoving it and shoving it with his hoe further in there. So the neighbors are like, man, this looks weird. So if anything, all the neighbors make the consensus that the very next morning they're gonna go and try to go into this neighbor's garbage and see what the heck that was. So so everyone is to go to bed, but Ray is to eventually go and look out of his window to eventually see that his neighbors, the creepy neighbors, all of a sudden are digging really big, massive holes in their backyard. Just be like, okay, this seems weird. So, so the very next morning, the garbage men are coming. And so we have Art scrambling, jumping over fences and brushes and bushes and everything to try to get to these garbage men, to try to get to this trash. And so Art is just dousing all of this trash onto the ground, and so Art is scrambling through all of it, and Art is to also ask these garbage men, hey, did you get all the garbage from these people? Also, Mark is like getting out of his house. I guess he had half uh shaven his facial hair, so he still has like shaving cream on. And so Mark is running out there to try to see if he can find the trash as well. So Ray, who is of course Tom Hanks, goes out there and runs after them as well. And so we have Carol, who is just like, Ray, you were getting just so bizarre with all this. So Ray runs out there, and Art and Mark are making the consensus that like, yeah, they must have switched the bag somewhere because like this bag doesn't exist now. Like they're going through all of the trash. Like the garbage man is even helping like these guys just dump all the trash out. And like Art is looking for a finger or a nail or a nose or something, and nothing is to come out of this. So Ray is to talk to his neighbors and tell them like, well, yeah, like I think that whatever they put in this trash can, they eventually decided to not put it in the trash can and decided to instead just bury it in their backyard. So that's when really just these neighbors are like, dude, like, we need to go and we need to get into that house, or we need to talk to these people, or we need to just really just jump over the fence at this point and go digging in their house. So what ends up happening is that Carol, Mark, Ray, and Mark's lady Bonnie all just decide that they are going to introduce themselves to these neighbors and bring brownies, which Mark accidentally drops because it seems like the wood is very fragile right in front of this home. And I think Ray almost fell through one piece of this wood, and I guess so did also Mark. And so Mark dropped the brownies. So there is an answer to this door, and Hans answers to this door. And so basically, all these tired neighbors are all going to let themselves in. And so while everyone is doing that, we have Art who is trying to make his way over to these neighbors to try and dig through their home. So basically, what's going inside is a distraction for Art to try to go and dig through things because he's finding these neighbors to be way too suspicious. To the point where Ricky and Ray's son are tossing over this pickaxe and I guess hitting Art with it, but I'm sure they actually didn't. So so they go inside, and so they are talking to Hans, and like they're looking around at his home that kind of looks very just like odd looking. Like we have Mark that is consistently adjusting this piece of art and like trying to like figure out where exactly like he thinks that it should rationally be, but eventually it gets corrected later. And then Mark is just like, I still don't like the way it's set. So, so we go on here, and so bizarrely we have Hans who is to offer these people pretzels and sardines because I guess that's all they have. I guess they don't have stuff for like normal guests. But also this guy who is the Ruben Klopex is to go in here. And at first it seems like they are to say, or really just Ruben is to say that, well, that like me, who is a father, and his son are the only one that actually lives here. But then all of a sudden they are to hear another sound, and so Ruben is to make a consensus of like, well, actually there's also a doctor that lives here as well. And they're like, and Bonnie's like, oh, well, that's great, like it'd be great to have a doctor in the neighborhood. And they're like, yeah, I'm not sure. So so eventually, like Hans is to pass around the pretzels and sardines, and everyone is to take a pretzel, but Ray's character is to eventually take a pretzel and a sardine and combine them and just go and just eat the whole thing. And he's like, and he's like, and like he has this like, I guess this reaction to it, or he's having like some kind of like problem with it. But I think it has. He says that it has something to do with some kind of allergy that he has to the room, but it's probably from that food because he's probably just like, yeah, that was just a wrong taste in my mouth. So Art is eventually going ahead and trying to dig through this house. Uh, So eventually, the neighbors, the reason why they are getting even more suspicious about this house is because it seems that one of the neighbors that they were to have has bizarrely just gone missing for a certain number of days. Because we have a guy who is, I believe, named Walter that is to consistently have his dog take a crap on Mark's lawn. So all of a sudden, this neighbor Walter is to seemingly go missing for a number of days. So that means all of a sudden people are starting to get suspicious, and all of a sudden are to see a toupee of Walter's in his home, and it's like, well, why wouldn't this guy go out of his home without a toupee on? That seems weird. So now queuing up, going back to where we are with Tom Hanks eating a sardine and just having a problem with it. So uh, Tom or Tom Hanks Ray is trying to come up with a reason for them to go into the basement, and eventually he is to mention about like some kind of way of like that a basement could quite possibly easily flood for one reason or another. And Mark is like, well, yeah, like maybe like good idea, Ray. Like if anything, yeah, like we should go and check out your basement to see if there would be any flooding problems or anything like that so we can help you out. But really just help ourselves out. So uh so eventually it almost gets to that, but because when they do actually try to go to the basement, eventually they are to open the door to all of a sudden have this gigantic dog come out. That is basically, they joke about like it's like you have a horse in your house, but it's just a really gigantic looking dog that eventually just makes its way like through this house and out the door, and eventually is to just kind of run off. So Ray is to look uh, like after this dog is to leave. Ray is to look around, and then eventually this doctor is to finally show himself, Doctor Werner. Doctor Werner. So this doctor is to talk to a lot of the people and just kind of mention in much more like he talks a lot more than any of the other people do. So Dr. Werner kind of like talks about like what they're doing here, and that unfortunately they will probably be also leaving soon because it seems like they're also going to get transferred elsewhere. And so we have both the ladies that are like, "Oh, isn't that great? So now we can finally just have this person get the heck out of our neighborhood so we don't have to bother about him anymore." Or like our of course husbands won't. So like putting this whole thing to rest. So we are to go on to have eventually, after this whole like talking to the the Copelands or the Coplex or whatever their names is, the Klopek, yeah. So after talking to all of them and just how great they were and how welcoming they really and truly were, everyone eventually goes back in their same homes and just be like, well, yeah, but we never really got to like actually see the basement, and that just kind of sucks. Well, Ray is to eventually go and take something from out of his pants because Ray is, or because Art is to mention to uh is to mention to Ray about his huevos or his grapefruits, and so Ray is to all of a sudden start pulling something out of his pants, and Art was like, "Dude, I don't mean you have to actually show me your huevos. Like, come on, like it was a joke." So Ray all of a sudden is pulling something out of his pants, and it was a toupee that was actually Walter's. And so they're like, "Wait a minute, like, dude, you've been having this guy's like toupee in your pants all day long?" And Ray is like, "No, like I found this toupee at the Klopexes because it seems once that dog came out, it seems that I found this toupee and a bunch of also Walter's mail at these guys' house. Doesn't that seem fairly suspicious?" And so they're like, "Yeah, that does seem suspicious." So uh, we had the doctor that had mentioned that these people were going to leave to go somewhere, like the whole entire family were going to leave to be going somewhere. And like funny enough also, because I just saw something, the little note, like bizarrely both Art and Mark eventually went off to eventually put a note underneath this person's door, and like mentioning that I know what you've done. So like that's what kind of really just starts out the rampiness of this whole movie. But I thought it was kind of funny that eventually that like Ray and Art were in their backyard, and all of a sudden there's a note that is to be tossed back into, of course, Ray's house, and Ray watches Art pick this up, and Art is like, "Well, yeah, like it could be any number of paper, maybe this guy's a litter bug," and then Art kind of unravels it and is like, "Oh no, that's my note." Like, yeah, I know what you did too. I know that you deliver this note. Um, like it was funny the whole note thing uh, because Ray was thinking it's like, well, hey, like I bet they just automatically assumed that it was actually me who gave them that note because I was the one who gave a note under Walter's door mentioning that I have his dog because Ray's dog or Walter's dog uh, was still at Walter's home while Walter was away. So Ray just decided to just take care of it while Walter was gone. So pushing on. So while the Green Hornet car leaves, or what I think is the Green Hornet car, and all of the whole Klopex family are all in this car. So we have Art, Ray, and Mark all deciding to like, dude, we're gonna break into this home. We're gonna uh, uh, we're gonna cut a wire to their electricity that's going to have their house alarm not go off, and then we're gonna try to sneak into this home and try to like get into this house and get into the basement of this and figure out what's going on. Really, there is this consistent part where really just Carol is asking Ray what he actually wants to do with his vacation, because Carol is kind of like mentioning to Ray how he's like squandering his vacation, that it seems he's not really doing anything of a good quality with his vacation. It just kind of seems like uh he's just sitting around, or it's like if anything he could actually go and get a tan or do something productive. And Ray's like, "I don't want to get a tan. I don't want to." Uh, so Ray goes with these guys. So uh, Art goes and cuts one of the wires of electricity that is to be connected to the security of this home. And Art accidentally electrocutes himself and falls into this shed. And artist to mention that he got a pretty decent jolt that eventually, like, some of his fillings are hot. So, and plus also his nails are all of a sudden black now. So, uh, so pushing on to showcase that, hey, yeah, like the security is now out on this home, so they can just easily be able to like make it past this house. Here's a goofy thing that I have a problem with. So I don't think that those same exact wires were there, like the whole like string things were there before when Art was to make his way like past that fence. But all of a sudden, when the story needs to conveniently have this thing, all of a sudden they have this thing with the whole alarm system, and I'm like, okay, like I don't see those wires there before, or like I don't see how it was all of a sudden a problem now, but it is what it is. So these people make their way over to this home, go into the basement, and what they do is they just basically break into this home. Like they, like at first, like Ray is to try to slice this card, but the card breaks, so Ray just breaks into the home and goes into the basement and starts digging in the basement to try to find a body or something in there. So these guys just continue to keep on digging and digging and digging, and so Ricky is basically having a whole entire party at his house and watching over what the guys are doing. And so there are some people that are just like, dude, like I gotta go to work in an hour. When is something gonna pop off? And Ricky's like, well, I don't know, but it's gonna happen soon. And so eventually, one of Ricky's friends is calling over to Mark, and eventually Mark is to basically fall off his roof because, like, eventually someone is to scare him, and so Mark is to fall off his roof and shoot a window of his car by accident, and so Mark is to eventually, once he gets back on his roof. Mark is to tell the guy that is giving him crap for like, hey, when are things gonna happen? And Mark is like Ricky, these are the friends that you have. Like this guy's a moron. Like get him the heck out of here. So Mark continues to watch on, like just consistently, and so eventually the people are to make it back to their home, the Klopex, or to make it back to the home. And so Mark is telling Ricky to stall these people as much as possible. So Ricky is kind of getting in the street and he's like, hey, 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 like trying to stop them. And Ricky is to eventually go and hop on the hood of this cop car to mention that there's a bunch of people at his home that are all eating his food and doing whatever, and like it's getting out of control, and he wants these police officers to stop them. Like he orchestrated all this, but like really, like Ricky is trying to stall any number of these people from getting Ray and Art arrested. So Art and Art and Ray are continually digging, so much so that they accidentally dig and hit the gas line. And so Ray now has to tell Art that's like, dude, we need to get out of this house because it'll probably blow up because like I hit the gas line. And so both Art and Ray get the heck out of there. Plus, they also realize that there is a furnace that was down there, and so they're like, "Oh, so that's what's been making all that noise." So Ray and Art scramble out of this home, and so once they get out of the home, all of a sudden this home is to blow up. So, uh, so the Klopeks are just watching on as their home is just burning to rubble, and so like uh, Ray and Art just got out of there in the nick of time, but Ray also looks very injured and very battered and whatever from this house blowing up. So he kind of got a piece of it, but not all of it. So like they're basically sending everybody out there, ambulance, fire, everything to kind of take out this home and to kind of clean it up. Like police are there and everything. So Art and Art and Mark and everybody are to basically like Mark is to realize that actually Walter had come back. That it seems that Walter was just away because he had, I guess, some heart problems. So he went to the hospital. So Mark knows that, but all of a sudden Mark is telling this police officer that like the reason why they thought that these neighbors were suspicious is because Walter is probably dead. And you're gonna find a body of Walter stashed in this home somewhere, and then the police officer is immediately like, the guy that's alive right here, like that's the guy that you're thinking is dead. And so Art is like, well, yeah, I'm sure you can probably find a bone or a body in there anyways, because if anything, before Art had found out that this dog had a femur, a human bone before. So I guess from that house. So eventually Tom is just like, you know what, like no one is ever gonna believe us. Like if anything, like I'm sure these neighbors are completely fine. And like you can really just see that Ray has just like lost his freaking mind, and that he just wants to go to a hospital because he is hurt. So he just he just picks the hospital bed up, chucks it into the ambulance, and sits into uh, the ambulance bed and just waiting to go to the hospital. And Carol is asking Ray, it's like, are you okay? And Ray's like, yeah, I just want to go. I just want to get out of here. And so Carol is like, well, okay, like I'll meet you with wherever hospital that you go to. So all of a sudden, we are to have the doctor Werner eventually go into the ambulance and to mention to Ray that like, well, yeah, I guess you found me out. I guess you figured it out that that I had killed the previous neighbors that had lived here. Like they didn't want to sell the house. I wanted to buy the house, and so I wanted their house, so I killed them for it. And so Ray is just like, wow, you know what? That's kind of interesting. Well, you know what? I think I forgot my wallet in at my home. I'm gonna go grab it. So Warner uh, pushes Ray back into the bed, and we find out that it seems that Hans is wielding this ambulance, and so Dr. Werner is going and trying to put some kind of needle into Ray, and Ray is trying to fight him with it to eventually have uh, eventually this ambulance going all wild and eventually crashing into some home that was actually Art's home. And we have both we have both Ray and the doctor coming out of this ambulance via both of these people being on this bed. And so all of a sudden Ray and the doctor are to get out of this bed, and Ray is mentioning that he's going to make his a citizen's arrest, that he's going to arrest the doctor because the doctor had confessed that he had killed the previous owners of this house. So they're like, well, yeah, but like we don't have any real substantial evidence. But all of a sudden, they are to find that there is some, because all of a sudden the hood of this car is to pop open, and there's a bunch of skeletons that are to be there, and they're like, oh, well, I guess we will have evidence on these people after all, and send them away for a very long time. Hans is to eventually try to get out of the art house. And so Hans is trying to scrabble, and Mark grabs him and is like kind of putting him in like a choke kind of position. Just like, dude, like, there's no way you're gonna get out of this. So this whole family is to eventually get arrested, and so now Carol is to be with Ray, and so Carol is now asked Ray, it's like, well, hey, what are you gonna do now? And Ray mentions like, well, I'm gonna spend the rest of my vacation going out in the lake, and we're gonna have a good time, and like forget about all this. So we have Art, who is all of a sudden, like, since this whole situation had arisen, Art is now trying to do as much news coverage as he possibly can, not even realizing that his house is burning down. So Art is like doing all this news coverage and all these, like every reporter, like he's going and doing the little interviews, mentioning about how, like, you know what, for any murderers or psychos or whatever, like, you need to watch out for suburbanites, because eventually they'll get you. Like, they'll come for you. Like, they know that you're doing something wrong, and they'll sniff it out. They'll find it. They'll get you, and like blah blah blah. So Ray is mentioning that he's gonna go out into the lake and forget all this, and Art is like, dude, like, that's a huge mistake. Like, if anything, like, this is gonna be the best time for you to like stay here and like do all this news coverage and be on TV and all this kind of stuff. And Ray is just like, I've had it. Like, like, if anything, like Ray, like, I think was much more pushed into this, and then eventually, like, Ray started having like the most interesting scene that I probably almost left out. Was Ray having a nightmare where he was basically being shoved onto this giant grill, and all of a sudden, all of his neighbors started to pop in, and like were basically just being very creepy esque like people, or basically like telling Ray like, hey, don't let what they don't don't let them do to you what they did to me. And like Walter is now like with an axe in his head, and so is his dog. And Art is to all of a sudden not to be the real Art, but he's to be some like butcher looking character that is like, hey, like, hey everybody, get ready for the massacre, get ready for the murder or whatever. And like we have like Hans, who has this like chainsaw in hand, and there's all these like these druids, or these all guys in like cloaks with these horns on their head that are, I guess, going to perform some ritual. There's a bunch of all kinds of stuff like gathered together all in this bizarre stream that doesn't quite make any sense, but it is to terrify Ray to want to push and figure out what's going on with these neighbors more, because of the nightmares that he's having. So, but yeah, eventually we get there, eventually we solve all this, and eventually there was a crime that happened after all. Like, really, we kind of also get to, like, I remember a Chevy Chase movie called Cops and Robinsons, and eventually, like, that movie, like, kind of reminded me a lot of this one, or vice versa. Like, it's not the exact same thing. It's like, but it does have that kind of like neighborhood thing. Or you get like the Shia LaBeouf movie Disturbia, which is kind of the same thing, uh, but Disturbia is kind of much more like Rear Window, and like Rear Window, it could be considered like this, but like you have a guy that's just binocularing people or telescoping people, and that's very different. Like, that's not actually being a part of your community, but still. Anyways, so yeah, like that's all that I wanted to say about this movie, but I think I covered most of it, and I kind of covered like what is to happen for bulk this movie. Like at the very end, we had Corey Feldman who's like, "Dude, I love this neighborhood," and then he just kind of walks off, and like that's really just the end of this movie. But with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.